Hello, I'm Sarah. One day, I opened an email from my husband David and saw a photo of him with his 20-year-old girlfriend in our vacation home. Along with the photo, he sent divorce papers. That moment changed everything, but it also sparked something inside me. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my fight to reclaim my life. Want to know how I turned betrayal into strength? Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced something so painful that you had to decide, will you let it break you, or will you rise up and fight? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story touched your heart, or let me know where you're watching from. The morning I opened my email, I never expected it would change my life. The subject line said, "Moving on," and attached was a photo of my husband David with a 23-year-old woman, Hannah. They were standing in front of the vacation home I bought with my own hard-earned money. My breath caught in my throat. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling as I clicked to open the email. I had seen that vacation home 1,000 times in my mind, the place where David and I had dreamed of spending our weekends, the place where we'd planned to build a future together. And now, seeing him there with her, my world shattered. The apartment around me felt too quiet. The sound of the city, the rush of traffic, people going about their lives outside. Everything felt distant, as if I was stuck in a vacuum, frozen in time. The world continued, but I couldn't move. My eyes locked on the words at the top of the email. The house is mine now. The photo they had attached was David's smug grin beside a woman young enough to be our daughter. Her hand was casually resting on his shoulder, and her face radiated happiness, as if she had claimed a prize she didn't deserve. I felt my heart plummet. I couldn't believe it. My husband of 5 years had betrayed me. And what was worse, he hadn't had the decency to tell me in person. The coward had sent an email to end everything. The house is mine now. The words echoed in my mind, louder than any noise outside. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed for was being taken away without a second thought. The house, the business, the life we built, it was all gone. Gone in an instant. But there was no time for tears. Not now. I clenched my fists around my phone, trying to focus. The anger began to build up inside me, hot and sharp. Not the kind of anger that made you cry or scream. No, this was different. This was the kind of anger that fueled you to take action. He thought he could tear everything apart with one email. He thought he could take my house, my business, and my dignity, all without a fight. But he was wrong. I clicked through the attachments slowly, each image more painful than the last. There they were. David and Hannah standing side by side, smiling as if the world was theirs for the taking. But what they didn't know was that I was about to show them something they didn't expect. The house wasn't his. The business wasn't his. My life wasn't his to take. I had worked tirelessly for everything I had, and I wasn't going to let some woman half my age and a man I once loved destroy it all. This was my house. I built this life. I didn't need him to tell me what was mine. I already knew. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on me. I typed a message to David. "Are you sure about that?" Then, without hesitation, I blocked him. It was the most empowering thing I'd done in months. I didn't even need to explain. He knew. I sat there for a moment, gripping my phone like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. It wasn't time for that. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something new, something I hadn't even planned for but was now inevitable. I could feel the shift inside me, like a dormant power had woken up. This was my life, and I was going to fight for it. I walked to my desk, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't sit idle. I had to take action. I opened my laptop and began researching the next steps. My lawyer's name came to mind immediately. Emily Clark had helped me with the paperwork when we bought the house, and I trusted her. It was time to reach out. I grabbed my phone again, this time dialing Emily's number. As the phone rang, I started making a mental checklist: divorce papers, asset protection, legal strategies. There was no time to waste. The call picked up, and I heard Emily's familiar voice on the other end. "Sarah, what's going on?" she asked, her tone immediately serious. "I need your help," I said, my voice steady. "It's time to take back control. I've just found out some things that can't be ignored. I need you to help me protect my business and assets. It's time to get started." There was a moment of silence on the line, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in Emily's mind. She was sharp, and I needed that right now. I needed someone who could keep up with the changes happening in my life, someone who knew how to handle the business and legal side of things. "I'll be there in an hour," Emily said, her voice firm. "Thank you," I replied, before hanging up. I looked at my phone, blocking David's contact permanently. It was time to move forward. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. This wasn't just about protecting my assets. It was about showing David and everyone what happens when you underestimate a woman who's ready to fight for what's hers. I had been so focused on my business and raising our daughter, Emma, that I didn't see the signs. The late-night work calls, the frequent trips to the lake house. Looking back, I realized I was too trusting. I had believed David's excuses, brushed off the oddities, and let him convince me that everything was fine. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I had ignored things I should have noticed. Now, sitting in my office, the reality of the situation hit me harder than any email or phone call could have. My desk was cluttered with papers, invoices, and notes from meetings, all reminders of how much I'd poured into my business, how much I had given of myself to build something real. The cold light from my laptop added to the sharpness of the moment, a stark contrast to the warmth I had once felt in my home. I leaned back in my chair, my phone buzzing incessantly beside me. I couldn't focus on anything but the question that had been nagging me for weeks. What was really going on with David? He had been acting distant lately, and the more I tried to push him to be honest, the more evasive he became. I needed answers, and I had a feeling that the truth was just a few clicks away. I pulled up old texts between us, his schedule, and receipts that had piled up over time. As I scrolled through the messages, I realized just how much I had missed. The late-night calls with vague explanations, the calendar entries marking his trips to the lake house, trips I had never been invited on. I dug deeper, opening old receipts from hotels and restaurants. And then it hit me. One receipt caught my eye. It was from a boutique hotel I didn't recognize, dated months ago, when David had claimed he was working late. It was the kind of place you wouldn't just stay in for business, and it wasn't just any hotel. It was the kind of place you go when you want to hide away. I could feel my heart begin to pound in my chest as the truth began to form. Every time David worked late, something about his actions didn't add up. My mind raced back to the countless times I had asked him about his trips, and he'd brushed me off, claiming he was too busy with mergers or meetings. But those late nights were becoming less about work and more about him. The hotel receipt, the private messages between him and someone else. It was all there, staring me in the face. It made sense now, all those little moments that I had excused. The silence between us, the distance in his eyes when we'd talk. My stomach churned as I realized that all along he had been living a lie, and I had been a fool for believing him. He had been seeing Hannah long before I ever suspected it. The truth was unbearable, but it was right there in front of me. He wasn't just busy on his trips. He was with her all the time. I wasn't just married to a liar. I was married to someone who thought he could get away with everything, someone who didn't care enough to be honest with me. And what hit hardest was realizing how little respect he had for me and the life we had built together. I didn't feel sadness. I felt anger, but not the kind that left me paralyzed or broken. No, this kind of anger fueled me, gave me purpose. I had worked too hard for everything I had, and I wasn't going to let David's betrayal take it all away. I wasn't going to let him control the narrative of my life, and I wasn't going to sit by and watch him destroy everything we had. Not anymore. With the evidence in hand, I knew I couldn't just sit idly by and wait for the fallout to come. I had to prepare for what was coming next. I had to protect my company, my future, and my daughter. It was no longer just about saving my marriage. This was about taking control of my life again, about being smart and strategic. The emotional side could come later. For now, I had to focus on the facts, the evidence, and what would be needed to protect what was mine. I stood up, feeling the resolve solidify inside me. This wasn't a time for self-pity or fear. This was a time to act, and act I would. I called my lawyer, Sarah, and let her know that I needed to talk. It was time to start preparing for what would undoubtedly be a messy battle. I didn't cry. I didn't beg him to come back. I didn't even ask for an explanation. The truth was out there, and there was no going back. This was the turning point. I wasn't going to be a victim. I wasn't going to allow myself to be weak in the face of betrayal. This was my life, and I was going to take back control. As I dialed Sarah's number, I felt a cold certainty sweep over me. The next few days would be critical. There would be no room for hesitation or weakness. I had a plan, and I was going to see it through. Now it was time to start collecting the pieces. Every little detail would be crucial in the fight ahead. But first, I had to face what was in front of me. David had made his move, but I was about to make mine. I didn't let myself feel sorry. I couldn't afford to. The betrayal had already struck deep, and there was no use in wallowing. I needed to think clearly. This wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about survival. My future depended on what I did next. The weight of the situation pressed on my chest, but I was used to pressure. I'd faced challenges before in business, and now I was going to face this one head on. My office was a mess. Papers scattered across my desk, my laptop open to my business accounts. I had been at it for hours, sifting through financial statements, contracts, and receipts, trying to piece together what had happened. The more I dug, the more I uncovered. I could feel the coldness of betrayal creeping through every page. David had taken everything for granted, assuming I was too busy with our daughter and my work to notice his little games. But I had been paying attention, even when I hadn't realized it. There were transfers, money being moved from our joint accounts into others I didn't recognize, receipts for things that didn't add up. Each document, each transaction was another piece of the puzzle. And every time I uncovered something new, the knot in my stomach tightened. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I wasn't going to let him walk away with what was mine, what I had worked for, what I had sacrificed. I wasn't naive. I knew how to protect myself. I had taken steps over the years to ensure my assets were safe, but David thought he could take it all, thinking I wouldn't notice, thinking I wouldn't fight back. I grabbed my phone and dialed Emily's number, my lawyer, my trusted ally, the one person I knew I could rely on in moments like this. As the phone rang, I felt my resolve harden. I wasn't just going to sit around and let him ruin my life. I was going to fight. The plan had to be solid, and I needed Emily to guide me through this. "Emily," I said when she answered, my voice steady but with a sense of urgency. "I need your help. It's time to take action." "What's going on?" Emily's voice was calm, but I could tell she was already bracing herself for what I was about to say. "David's been moving money around, hiding things. He's been playing me for a fool, and I'm not letting him get away with it. I need you to help me secure everything before he does any more damage." There was a pause on the line. Then Emily responded with her trademark confidence. "I'm on it. I'll gather the necessary paperwork. We'll get ahead of him, Sarah." I breathed a sigh of relief. Emily always had a way of calming me down and getting straight to the point. She knew what had to be done, and I trusted her to help me navigate this storm. I ended the call with Emily and immediately reached out to Olivia. She was my assistant, but she was also my right hand, the one person who had always had my back. She knew the ins and outs of my business and had been with me for years. I needed her help to dig deeper, to look for anything that David might have missed or overlooked. "Olivia," I said when she picked up, "I need you to go through every document and every financial record. Start with the last 3 months and look for anything unusual. Transfers, payments, anything. I need you to help me find out exactly what David has been doing behind my back." "Got it," Olivia replied immediately, no hesitation in her voice. "I'll get to work right now." I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, taking a deep breath. This wasn't going to be easy. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became how far David had gone. The man I had trusted with everything, the man I had built a life with, had been systematically taking advantage of me, of us. It wasn't just about money, it was about control. He wanted to take everything I had worked for, destroy the life I had built, and walk away unscathed. But that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to let him win. I opened another set of financial statements, checking off the discrepancies as I went. There were large sums of money that had been transferred to offshore accounts I couldn't even trace. A lump in my throat formed as I realized how far David had gone to cover his tracks. He had planned this, and I had been none the wiser. The more I found, the more determined I became. I couldn't let this continue. I wasn't going to just sit idly by. I had worked too hard for my business, for my daughter's future. I had to act. I picked up my phone again, and this time I called the bank. I needed to make sure that the money was safe. Our daughter's college fund, the savings, everything. They would help me lock down the accounts, freeze any suspicious transfers, and keep everything protected while I fought to get to the truth. By the time I ended that call, it was clear. I wasn't going to wait for David to make his next move. I was going to take control. I had already protected myself, and now it was time to make sure he didn't have a chance to destroy everything. With everything in motion, the next few hours felt like a whirlwind. There was so much to do, and I couldn't afford to waste time. I had my lawyer involved, my assistant on the case, and the bank working with me to protect my assets. I had the pieces in place. Now it was time to act. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't just going to react. I wasn't going to sit back and let David control the narrative. No, I was going to be proactive. The game had changed. Every step I took, every decision I made from this point forward would be strategic. There would be no more passive waiting. It was time to take the reins. Emily's law firm had become our war room. The sleek, modern office had stark white walls, a low hum of conversation in the background, and the steady ticking of a clock on the wall. It was oddly calming in some ways, but it was also a constant reminder that time was ticking down. The clock was moving, and so was I. Emily sat across from me, her focused gaze never wavering. Olivia, my loyal assistant, was seated beside me, her fingers flying across her tablet as she jotted down notes and prepared the next round of evidence. It felt almost surreal, like a well-oiled machine preparing for battle. But this wasn't just any battle. This was a fight for my life, for everything I had worked so hard to build. It was time to turn the tide in my favor. "We've filed the initial documents," Emily said, breaking the silence. "The first shot is fired, but David doesn't have a clue what's really going on." I nodded, feeling a rush of adrenaline at the thought. It was true. David thought he had the upper hand. He thought that with one email he could wipe everything I had built away and walk away unscathed. But he was wrong. I was already several steps ahead, and he had no idea what was coming for him. "I've got everything I need," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. The emails, the texts, the surveillance footage from the house, everything's coming together. We've got him. Emily gave me a knowing smile, her eyes alight with confidence. "Exactly. Every piece of this puzzle is falling into place. We just need to put it all in motion." As the legal documents were being processed and filed, I kept myself busy gathering more evidence. Each new detail was like another nail in David's coffin. The more I uncovered, the more I saw how deep his deception ran. He thought he could get away with this, but he hadn't realized the depth of my preparation. Olivia worked tirelessly, digging through the company's accounts, looking for anything that could further implicate David in his schemes. It was a team effort, but I had to admit, seeing everything come together was more satisfying than I ever could have imagined. The surveillance footage, the emails, Each new piece of evidence painted a clearer picture. The facts were on my side. I wasn't just hoping things would work out. I knew I had everything I needed to win. Then, one morning, after a particularly intense session of reviewing evidence, Emily looked up from her notes, her expression shifting from thoughtful to determined. "We've got him," she said, the words hanging in the air. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. The weight of what we had done, of what we were about to do, hit me all at once. It wasn't just about winning in court. This was about making sure that David would never take advantage of anyone again. The game was in my hands now, and there was no turning back. I felt a rush of vindication, but also a sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about me. It was about showing the world and David what happens when you underestimate someone like me. I had worked too hard to get where I was, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away. Not now, not ever. With the plan in place, we sent the legal documents to the right people, both the court and our key witnesses. The next steps had been set into motion. The wheels of justice were turning, and all I had to do now was wait for the inevitable fallout. I had done my part. Now it was David's turn to face the consequences of his actions. The moment was heavy, but it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I had no illusions about what was coming next. This was a long road, one that would be filled with legal battles, personal revelations, and emotional turmoil. But I was ready. I was prepared for whatever came my way, and I was no longer the woman who sat idly by and allowed her life to be controlled by others. The court battle was on the horizon. The truth was finally going to come to light, and when it did, I would be there to see it through to the end. David had no idea what he was about to face, but I did, and that gave me all the strength I needed. The deeper I dug, the darker it became. What I thought was a simple betrayal. A man who had fallen in love with someone else and tried to take my home was, in fact, a full-blown conspiracy. It wasn't just about the lake house or the house I had worked so hard for. It was about everything. My business, my money, my future. They had been planning to take it all from me. I had underestimated just how far David and Hannah were willing to go. But now, the truth was coming to light, and it was far worse than I could have ever imagined. I couldn't sleep. Every time I thought I had uncovered it all, there was more. More to the lies, more to the scheme. It wasn't just David. It was a web of people working behind the scenes, people I had trusted. Emily and I had been on the phone constantly, staying up late, trying to piece everything together. I could hear the strain in her voice when I called her with new discoveries, but she was as resolute as I was. We knew we were close, but I had no idea just how much more was waiting to be revealed. There was something chilling about the lake house as I looked at the pictures again. The quiet, uneventful place seemed to taunt me. It should have been a sanctuary, but instead, it felt like the eye of the storm. It stood in stark contrast to the chaos consuming my life. The place where David and I were supposed to make happy memories had become the epicenter of everything wrong in my life. Then, one night, everything shifted. I stumbled upon an email trail I hadn't noticed before, hidden in the depths of the accounts I had been investigating. It was from David to Hannah, but it wasn't just between them. There were other names attached, people I didn't recognize at first. As I read through the emails, my heart pounded in my chest. David had been working with Hannah, but he had also been coordinating with a high-powered bank executive, a man I had once met at a charity event, a man I had trusted, who had handled our accounts and finances for years. And now, here he was, involved in this intricate web of financial deception. They had been siphoning money from my accounts, funneling it into offshore holdings, using my own financial advisor to make it all disappear. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about my house or our marriage. This was a large-scale financial fraud, and David had been playing me for a fool. The emails painted a clear picture. He had been working with people I thought I could trust, people I had believed had my best interests at heart. Instead, they had been using my trust to drain my assets, to push me out of the market, to take everything I had worked for. I was stunned. I had never suspected this level of deception, this level of coordination. I had been so focused on the betrayal of our marriage that I hadn't seen the much bigger picture. This wasn't just a personal attack, it was an all-out assault on my livelihood, my business, and my future. And the worst part? David and Hannah weren't just after my life. They were after my entire empire. I picked up the phone again, dialing Emily's number. I couldn't breathe as I waited for her to pick up, my fingers trembling with the weight of the information I had just uncovered. When she answered, I barely got the words out. "Emily, it's worse than we thought. They're not just taking the house, they've been stealing from me. It's a conspiracy. They've been working with people at the bank, moving money into offshore accounts. They've been trying to destroy my business." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Emily's voice broke through, steady and firm. "I've been expecting this. We need to act fast. We have the evidence we need. We just need to make sure we protect everything before they move against you. We'll expose them all." I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was like a fog had lifted. I had all the pieces. I had the emails, the bank records, the receipts. It was all right in front of me. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was taking control of the situation, and I wasn't going to let anyone get away with what they had done. "We'll take them down," I said, my voice quieter but filled with determination. "This is no longer about saving my marriage or saving face. It's about justice, and I'm going to make sure they face it." Emily agreed, and we set the plan into motion. There was so much work to be done. The legal battle would take everything I had, but it was no longer just about protecting my assets. It was about ensuring they never had the chance to do this to anyone else again. As I sat back in my chair looking at the screen, I knew the fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had everything I needed. The truth was finally coming to light, and David's life was about to unravel. He had thought he could take everything from me, but he hadn't realized who he was dealing with. I wasn't backing down. I was ready for what came next. The moment we filed the papers, everything shifted. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was fighting for the truth. The weight of it all settled on my shoulders, but it didn't crush me. It fueled me. This wasn't about a betrayal anymore. This was about exposing the lies that had been hidden for far too long. David had been manipulating everything in his life, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. The cold, sterile walls of the courthouse felt suffocating, as if the building itself was holding its breath. My shoes clicked sharply on the polished floor as I walked into the courtroom, my heart steady in my chest. Emily, walking beside me, looked calm but resolute. The tension in the room was palpable. David and his team of slick, confident lawyers sat across from me. They didn't know it yet, but their smug smiles were about to fade as the evidence piled up. I took a seat at the table, my hands steady on the documents in front of me. This was it, the fight I had been preparing for, the fight that would change everything. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me, but I didn't flinch. I was ready. David's team was quick to dismiss the evidence we had already gathered. They tried to undermine everything I had worked for, every piece of documentation, every piece of evidence they had to face. But I wasn't going to let them twist the narrative. I had the truth on my side. The moment they thought they could control the story was the moment I knew I had them. As the trial progressed, I saw David squirm under the weight of the evidence. The initial cockiness he had walked in with had already begun to fade. His fingers trembled as he reached for his papers, and I could see the nervous glances exchanged between him and his lawyers. It was the small things that made me smile inwardly. The tables were turning. Every document, every testimony, every piece of information we laid out added to the picture of deceit he had so carefully constructed. And then came the moment when I knew we had him. I had been preparing for this day for weeks, months even. The offshore bank records, the ones he thought no one would ever find. I had them. I laid them out in front of the court, each transaction clearly marked, each illegal transfer highlighted. It was like watching a domino fall. The room grew still. There was a collective gasp when the judge leaned forward, his face shifting from neutral to shocked. The silence in the room was deafening. For the first time since this whole ordeal started, I could see it in David's eyes. Fear. It was a small shift, a crack in the armor, but I saw it. He was losing control. He hadn't expected me to be so prepared. He hadn't expected me to have proof of everything. The judge glanced over the documents, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. "We're going to need a moment," the judge said, his voice low and steady. It wasn't a question. It was a command. The entire courtroom buzzed with whispers, but I couldn't take my eyes off David. His arrogance was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous: desperation. The trial had only just begun, but in that moment I knew we were on the verge of something monumental. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was showing the world who David really was, and there was no going back. The legal battle was still in its early stages, but this was my moment to shine. The evidence was overwhelming, and it was only going to get worse for him from here. David and Hannah were caught in a web of lies they had been spinning for months, years maybe, and now their defenses were beginning to crumble. Their smug confidence had vanished, replaced by a frantic attempt to salvage what was left of their carefully constructed narrative. It wasn't over, but for the first time in this battle, I felt the weight of the injustice lifting from my shoulders. I could feel it, a strange calm mixed with adrenaline. I wasn't done, not by a long shot, but I knew we had just hit the turning point. The trial wasn't over, but with every word spoken, with every document presented, I felt justice inching closer. The momentum was shifting in my favor, and it felt right. I looked over at Emily, and for the first time, she gave me a smile. It wasn't just any smile. It was the smile of a warrior who knew that the battle was far from over, but that victory was now a tangible thing. She didn't say anything, but I didn't need her to. The plan was in motion, and everything was about to fall into place. The fight was far from over. But I was prepared. David had no idea what was coming next, and neither did Hannah. Their lies were being exposed piece by piece, and there was nothing they could do to stop it now. As the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, I realized this wasn't just about taking down David. It was about protecting everything I'd built. The house, the business, the life I had fought for. Everything was on the line. I wasn't just fighting to right a personal wrong. I was fighting to ensure that David and his accomplices didn't succeed in destroying everything I had worked so hard to create. The court proceedings had become the battleground, but the war, I knew, was far from over. The final days of the trial felt like a pressure cooker, the tension in the room thick and suffocating. Every word spoken by the lawyers seemed to echo louder than the last, each motion, each counterclaim, each objection building the anticipation in the room. The lawyers from David's side spoke in a flurry of legal jargon, their voices rising and falling like a strange rhythm that seemed to drown out everything else. But for me, it wasn't just about the law, it was personal. David had crossed a line, and I was going to make sure he faced the consequences. I glanced at Emily, who was leaning over a stack of documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had become my anchor throughout this entire ordeal. As we sat there, preparing for what was coming next, I couldn't help but feel that we were on the precipice of something huge. The end of the battle was near, but it felt as though the final moments were still stretching out before us. David's team, ever the opportunists, tried everything they could to avoid facing the full weight of their actions. The final desperate move came when David himself filed a motion to dismiss, hoping against all odds that he could escape the consequences. He wanted to avoid facing the mountain of evidence we had built against him, but Emily and I weren't about to let that happen. It was his last attempt at manipulating the system, hoping that some last-minute technicality would save him from the truth. We weren't about to let that slide. Emily stood firm, fighting back against David's motion with the skill and determination I had come to admire. We used his own words and actions against him, tearing apart every piece of his defense. With each passing moment, David's world began to crumble. The more we presented, the more the walls around him seemed to close in. But it wasn't just the documents that would bring him down. It was the people he had thought would never betray him. One by one, we brought in the witnesses. Each one corroborated every piece of evidence we had gathered, painting a clear picture of David's calculated manipulation. His partners in crime, people he had thought he could control, were now singing like canaries. The walls had closed in on him, and there was nowhere left to run. But it wasn't just David that was under fire. Hannah's role in the whole conspiracy came to light, and her involvement was undeniable. She wasn't the innocent bystander David had tried to make her out to be. She was a key player in the fraud, and her guilt was exposed for all to see. The final blow came, and it hit harder than I expected. As the tension in the courtroom reached its peak, I presented the last piece of the puzzle, something I had been saving for the right moment, a recorded conversation between David and one of his accomplices. In it, David explicitly admitted to his role in the plan to steal from me, to undermine my business, and to destroy everything I had worked so hard to build. The room went still. Everyone, from the judge to the jury to David's team, sat in shocked silence as the words played out loud. There was no denying it. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge's expression shifted from neutral to stunned. For the first time, David's face paled as he sat back in his chair. He knew he was caught. There was no escape now. The court couldn't ignore what had just been presented. It was his confession in his own voice. And it was damning. David's world was crashing down. I could feel the weight of it in my chest, but there was no joy in it. There was no satisfaction in seeing him squirm. What mattered now was the truth. This was no longer about personal vendettas. It was about ensuring that David paid for what he had done, that justice was served, and that I could walk away with what was rightfully mine. The defense had no more ground to stand on. Their arguments crumbled before our eyes, and the judge called for a recess to deliberate. I felt a quiet victory settle in me, but it wasn't the end. Not yet. It was only the beginning of David's downfall. This was a turning point, but I knew that the final blow would come soon. As the courtroom emptied, I allowed myself a brief moment of peace. The tension in my body eased slightly, but I knew this was far from over. The decision was imminent, and I could feel the weight of it in my bones. I had done everything I could to expose the truth, and now it was in the hands of the court. But for the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt a sense of justice inching closer. The scales were beginning to tip in my favor. The battle had been long and it wasn't over, but the end was now within sight. The final moment was coming, and when it came, I was ready. The final verdict came down in my favor. The sound of the judge's gavel hitting the desk echoed in my ears, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just a legal win, it was my reclamation of power. For so long, I had let David's manipulation and deceit control my life. But now, I had taken back control. The battle was over, and I had emerged victorious. I stood there, feeling the magnitude of the moment settle in. The truth had been heard, and justice had been served. The courtroom was still buzzing with activity. Reporters crowded around, trying to get their statements, capturing every moment. Outside, the city of New York hummed with its usual energy, the skyline vibrant under the afternoon sun, life continuing on as though nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. The world was ready to move forward, and so was I. David and Hannah had been found guilty. The judge's ruling was clear. Their lies had been exposed, their schemes laid bare for all to see. There was nowhere left for them to hide. Their smugness had evaporated the moment the verdict was read. I had spent months preparing for this moment, and now I was finally free. Free from the weight of their betrayal, free from the shadows that had been hanging over me. The courtroom was a battleground, but now it felt like a place of closure. I didn't just win in court, I won my life back. The victory was sweet, but not because of the money or assets I had fought for. No, the sweetness came from something deeper. It came from the satisfaction of knowing that I had been true to myself, that I had fought back against the betrayal with everything I had. I hadn't let David's lies define me, and I hadn't let him destroy everything I'd built. This wasn't about taking things from him. It was about reclaiming what was mine, my dignity, my future, and my daughter's future. As David and Hannah were escorted out of the courtroom, the whispers began. There was a quiet ripple in the air as people began to process what had just happened. I stood there, calm, my breath steady. The courtroom had erupted in hushed tones, but for me it was a moment of clarity. I had done what I set out to do. I had protected my future, my daughter, and my company, and now the world was wide open before me. The weight I had carried for so long was finally gone. As I walked out of the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. This was just the beginning of something new. My business was stronger than ever. With the support of Emily and Olivia, my team, we had weathered the storm, and now we would build again. It wasn't just about the win in the courtroom. It was about the future, about taking back the control that had been taken from me for so long. Looking out the windows of the courthouse, I saw the skyline stretching out before me, the same skyline I had looked at countless times, but this time, it felt different. It felt like a fresh start. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city, and I could feel it deep in my bones. Hope. This was my fresh start. The future was bright, and nothing was going to stop me now. I had been through the worst of it, and I had come out stronger on the other side. I felt a quiet resolve settle in my chest as I walked away from the courthouse. The lessons I had learned in this journey would stay with me forever. Betrayal had taken so much from me, but it had also taught me to fight for myself. I wasn't going to let anyone take what was mine again. As I walked into my new life, I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced the storm, and I had come out victorious. This was my time to thrive. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living, and nothing was going to take that away. As I stand here, looking back on everything that has happened, I can't help but reflect on how far I've come. What started as a painful betrayal turned into one of the most empowering journeys of my life. I didn't just fight for what was mine. I fought for myself, my future, and my daughter's future. And in doing so, I realized something very important. No one can take what you've worked for unless you let them. Life will throw curveballs, some bigger than others, but how we respond is what defines us. It's not about what happens to us, but what we do with it. I want to leave you with a few thoughts. Sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we face within ourselves. It takes courage to stand up for what you believe in, even when the odds seem stacked against you. But let me tell you this. When you stand firm in your truth, there is no force that can break you. Trust yourself, trust your journey, and never let anyone else's narrative define who you are. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a betrayal or challenge that made you question your strength? How did you overcome it? Or maybe you're in a similar fight right now. What steps are you taking to reclaim your power? If you found this story inspiring or it resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. And if you feel like this video has touched your heart, leave a comment with a 1 or let me know where you're watching from. If you didn't like it, I'd love to hear your thoughts and what you think could have been better. Let's connect and keep this conversation going. Remember, no matter what you're facing, the strength to overcome it has always been inside you. I'm glad you're here on this journey with me, and I can't wait to share the next story with you. Until next time, take care and keep fighting for what's rightfully yours. Subscribe to stay updated on all future stories. See you in the next one.